The night Rome conquered her city did not begin with screams. It began with silence so heavy it felt like a second sky pressing down on the earth. Fires burned without crackling. Doors hung open without a single footstep crossing their thresholds. Even the dogs did not bark. In the heart of the palace, the queen stood barefoot on cold marble, listening to the sound of her own breath and realizing, with a clarity sharper than fear, that death would have been mercy. Rome did not always kill its queens. Sometimes it kept them alive. And what Rome did next was worse than dying. She had been taught since childhood that a crown was a promise between ruler and people, that dignity was a shield no blade could pierce. Her mother had told her that even in defeat, a queen must remain a queen. Rome knew this too. That was why it did not rush to end her life. Roman soldiers did not drag her by the hair or strike her down in rage. They bowed, just enough to mock her, and spoke her title aloud as if tasting it. Queen. The word echoed through the shattered hall like a curse. From that moment on, her punishment began, not with pain, but with preservation. They stripped her of nothing at first. Her robes remained intact, her hair uncut, her posture untouched. She was escorted through her own palace as if on a ceremonial walk, but the eyes watching her were no longer her people's. They were Roman eyes, trained to measure value, weakness, and spectacle. Rome understood theater better than any empire before or after it. It knew that humiliation ripened slowly, that dignity had to be displayed before it could be destroyed. So they let her walk with her chin lifted, knowing the fall would be greater. She was taken not to a dungeon but to a room with windows. That alone told her everything. Prisoners meant to die were hidden away. Prisoners meant to be used were displayed. From her window she could see her city being catalogued, not looted in frenzy but inventoried with care. Statues were wrapped in cloth. Scrolls were stacked. Gold was weighed. Rome did not conquer to burn. It conquered to absorb. And she realized, was now part of that inventory. Days passed without explanation. Food was brought regularly, clean water, even warm baths. Roman women attended her, speaking little, their faces neutral. They treated her body as something valuable, something to be maintained. That was when the fear truly took root. Rome did not preserve what it planned to discard. At night, alone, she imagined death in every form she had ever heard of, and found herself longing for any of them. But morning came, always gentle, always cruel. When they finally told her what would happen, they did so politely. A Roman official, clean-shaven and calm, explained that she would be taken to Rome. Not as a prisoner of war, he clarified, but as a living symbol. Her people had resisted too long. Rome needed to teach a lesson, not just to her land, but to every land that still believed a crown could protect them. She would walk in a triumph. The words sounded almost beautiful. Triumph. Victory. Celebration. In her culture, a defeated ruler was allowed to die with honor, sometimes by her own hand. Rome denied her even that choice. A triumph required the defeated to live, to breathe, to be seen. Her survival was not mercy. It was the instrument of punishment. The journey to Rome was long and carefully orchestrated. She was not chained, but she was never alone. Wherever she went, whispers followed. People came out to see her, not to throw stones, but to stare. Roman soldiers made sure her name was spoken correctly, her lineage explained, her former power emphasized. The higher she had stood, the further she would fall. Children pointed at her crown. Merchants repeated rumors. By the time she reached the outskirts of Rome, she was already famous for her defeat. Rome itself was louder than anything she had known. It roared like a living creature, fed by conquest and spectacle. The streets were decorated for the triumph long before she was brought inside. Garlands hung from columns. Temporary stands were built for spectators. Painters rehearsed scenes of her surrender that made her look smaller than she was, weaker than she had been. Rome was rewriting her story while she still lived inside it. They dressed her on the morning of the triumph. Not in rags, not in chains, but in the full regalia of her former rank. Heavy fabric embroidered with symbols of her gods, jewelry that marked her as royal. Each piece felt like an accusation. She understood then that Rome wanted her remembered not as a broken woman, but as a conquered queen. The distinction mattered. Rome crushed enemies. It paraded trophies. When she stepped into the street, the sound hit her like a physical blow. Thousands of voices merged into one vast, heaving noise. Some cheered. Some laughed. Some simply watched with fascination. She walked behind Roman generals who were greeted as heroes, her presence proof of their greatness. Every step forward erased a piece of her past. She was no longer moving toward anything. She was being displayed. Her eyes searched the crowd, not for kindness but for understanding. She found none. To Rome, she was not a person. She was an idea made flesh. The idea that resistance was futile. That queens could be carried through foreign streets like ornaments. That survival could be a punishment. The triumph lasted hours. Her legs trembled, her back ached, but she was not allowed to falter. Guards walked close, ready to steady her if she stumbled. A fallen queen would end the spectacle too soon. Rome needed her upright. Rome needed her seen. When the procession finally ended, she expected death. Many did. That was the rumor Rome allowed to circulate, the final threat hanging in the air. But instead, she was taken away quietly, almost gently, as if the worst was already over. It was not. After the triumph, Rome did not kill her. It erased her. Her name was removed from records. Her titles were no longer spoken. She was given a new identity, not as a queen, but as a dependent of the state. She lived, but not as herself. Her days were filled with small, deliberate humiliations. She was told when to eat, when to sleep, when to speak. She was corrected when she used words from her own language. She was praised when she adopted Roman customs. People came to see her sometimes, guests of powerful families, scholars, even curious nobles. They asked her questions about her homeland, her battles, her father. She answered politely, carefully. Each answer was another thread cut from the fabric of her old life. Rome did not want her silence. It wanted her cooperation. A silent queen was a martyr. A speaking one was a lesson. Years passed. The memory of her resistance faded. New wars replaced old ones. New queens were captured, paraded, absorbed. She watched it happen from the edges of Roman society, invisible and yet never free. Death would have ended her story. Rome ensured it continued, emptied of meaning. In the end, she understood the truth that Rome never bothered to hide. Killing an enemy ended the conflict. Keeping them alive turned victory into something eternal. A dead queen could inspire rebellion. A living one, broken and repurposed, taught obedience. That was what Rome did to captured queens. It did not always spill their blood. It spilled their identity, slowly, carefully, until nothing remained but a body that breathed and a name that no longer belonged to them. And in that quiet, endless survival, Rome proved its cruelest power. Long after the crowds forgot her face, long after the triumph banners were taken down and reused for the next conquest, the former queen still woke each morning in a city that had swallowed her whole. Rome had not killed her, and that was the point. Death would have been an ending. Rome preferred punishment without end. Rome did not end its punishment when the triumph was over. That was only the moment when the city stopped watching and began shaping her. The real cruelty started afterward, in the quiet spaces where no crowd could witness what survival truly meant. She was moved to a residence on the edge of the city, neither prison nor home. The walls were clean, the rooms modestly furnished, the doors unlocked but guarded from a distance. Rome did not need bars. The city itself was the cage. Every road led inward, toward its power, and every path outward was closed by law, custom, and fear. She could walk in the garden, feel the sun, breathe air that smelled of olive trees and stone, but freedom was an illusion carefully maintained. Rome excelled at illusions. At first, she believed time might soften the wound. That memory would fade, that grief would dull. She was wrong. Memory did not fade in Rome, it was sharpened. Each day reminded her of what she had been by showing her what she was no longer allowed to be. She was forbidden to wear her crown, forbidden to practice her old rituals, forbidden even to speak to herself in her native tongue. When Roman tutors came, they corrected her gently, smiling as they reshaped her thoughts. Rome did not beat defiance out of its captives. It educated it away. They taught her Roman history as if it were destiny rather than conquest. They spoke of order, law, civilization. They framed Rome as a savior, not a destroyer. At first she resisted silently, holding her truth tightly inside. But silence, she learned, could be broken by loneliness. Days passed without hearing her own language spoken. Weeks passed without seeing a face that remembered her past. Isolation did what force could not. It made her doubt herself. She began to dream in Latin. That frightened her more than chains ever could have. Dreams were the last place Rome should not have reached, and yet there it was, whispering inside her mind, rewriting her even as she slept. She woke from those dreams ashamed, as if she had betrayed not just her people, but herself. But there was no one to confess to, no ritual of cleansing, no familiar god to hear her guilt. Rome had taken even that. Occasionally she was summoned to public events, never announced, never honored, but always visible. She would sit among Roman women of noble birth, expected to observe their customs, their laughter, their effortless confidence. They treated her kindly, which somehow hurt more than cruelty. They asked her advice on governance, on diplomacy, on foreign lands, as if she were an interesting book rather than a living wound. She answered because refusing would only confirm Rome's narrative of her as stubborn and backward. Compliance became survival. She realized then that Rome did not want her broken. It wanted her useful. A queen who resisted was dangerous. A queen who adapted became proof of Rome's superiority. Each time she spoke calmly of her homeland as something past and finished, Rome won again. Each time she smiled politely while discussing the fall of her own city, Rome celebrated a victory no army could have secured. Years passed, marked not by seasons but by changes in emperors, laws, fashions. She aged in a city that remembered her youth better than she did. New faces replaced old ones, and fewer people recognized her each year. That was Rome's final insult. Obscurity. She had once commanded armies. Now she was a curiosity fading into irrelevance. Yet even in obscurity, Rome's grip did not loosen. When she asked for permission to leave the city, to visit a shrine outside the walls, the request was denied with polite regret. When she suggested returning to her homeland as a Roman ally, the idea was dismissed gently, as if indulging a child's fantasy. Rome did not fear her return. It feared what her memory might awaken. She began to understand that Rome's true weapon was not violence, but time. Time to reshape narratives. Time to let pain exhaust itself. Time to ensure that when people finally forgot her, they would forget what she represented as well. Resistance required memory, and Rome starved memory slowly, methodically. Sometimes she wondered what had become of her people. Had they adapted as she had? Had they learned to live under Roman rule, to pay Roman taxes, to worship Roman gods alongside their own? Or had they clung to her name as a symbol, whispering stories of the queen who had been taken but not killed? The thought haunted her. If they remembered her as defiant, Rome had failed. If they remembered her as submissive, Rome had succeeded beyond measure. One evening, many years after her triumph, she was invited to a private gathering hosted by a Roman senator. The room was filled with scholars, poets, and officials discussing the nature of power. Wine flowed. Laughter echoed. At one point, the senator gestured toward her and asked, almost casually, what she believed was Rome's greatest strength. The room fell silent. She felt every eye on her, waiting for a performance. This was not a question. It was a test. The truth burned inside her, sharp and dangerous. Rome's greatest strength was its cruelty disguised as order, its ability to destroy without appearing savage. But she knew that saying so would change nothing except her own comfort. Rome did not punish truth. It simply ignored it. So she answered carefully. She spoke of Rome's patience, its ability to think beyond the moment, to win not just wars but futures. The senator smiled, satisfied. The others nodded. Rome had heard what it wanted to hear. That night, alone, she wept for the first time in years. Not for her lost crown, nor for her city, nor even for the people who might still remember her. She wept because she understood that Rome had succeeded. It had made her complicit in her own erasure. She had become the voice that explained Rome's greatness, the living evidence that resistance ended not in glory, but in absorption. She considered death then, seriously, quietly. Not as escape, but as defiance. If she chose her own end, she could reclaim something Rome had denied her, agency. But even that had been anticipated. Her movements were observed discreetly. Medicines were measured. Sharp objects were kept from her under the guise of concern. Rome did not fear her living. It feared her dying on her own terms. In the end, death came naturally, as it always does, unannounced and indifferent. There was no execution, no ceremony. She died in a modest room, attended by servants who did not know her story. Her passing was recorded in a ledger, her name misspelled, her origin noted vaguely. A former queen reduced to a line of ink. No rebellion followed. No uprising bore her name. Rome had ensured that. Yet history has a way of leaking through cracks Rome believed sealed. Whispers survived. Fragments of her story remained in foreign accounts, in bitter songs, in half-remembered legends of a queen who lived too long in enemy hands. Scholars centuries later would argue about her fate, debating whether Rome showed mercy or cruelty. They would miss the truth. Rome did not spare captured queens because it respected them. It spared them because survival could be shaped into submission, memory into warning. Death was final, but life under Rome was endless instruction. Every breath a lesson. Every year a reminder. What Rome did to captured queens was worse than death because death ends suffering. Rome prolonged it, refined it, and turned it into policy. It transformed living women into monuments of defeat, breathing proof that even crowns could be unmade without blood. And that was Rome's greatest triumph of all.